And you're listening to the Tom Kelly Show, the home of personal growth and fun. Is your life where you want it to be? Well, my name is Tom Kelly, and I'm a stand-up comedian who you've seen on Good Morning America, The View, America's Got Talent, and I'm fixing up my life so you don't have to fix up yours. This is a weekly, inappropriate TED Talk where we take the existential crisis and turn it into a renaissance. Hit subscribe on YouTube and hit that notification button, and also hit subscribe and that download button on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. If it's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday and you don't see me, something's wrong with your app. Come find me at TomKellyShow.com. I'm across the board on social media as Tom Kelly Show, and we have a very unique show today. You're listening to
The Tom Kelly Show. Everybody, I want you to go to
and that, Michelle, is what you were missing in your play. We'll talk about this in a second. You needed music performed by a street performer. That's what you were missing. But right now, trigger warning, spoiler alert, don't try the peas. You are listening to the Tom Kelly Show. You're experiencing the Tom Kelly Show. I've got an amazingly different type of show today, or a unique guest, a get, as you would say. I have Michelle Kholos Brooks, the playwright of Hitler's Tasters, a play that's been reviewed. I caught it most recently by the New York Post. I just saw it. It's amazing. And we'll get into the plot and all of that in a second. You know it's good because it has Hitler in it. Anyway, why did I go see it? I have been reading a book called The Artist's Way, and one of the things that it says in the book is to just go experience art that has maybe nothing to do with your art. And I read about the weird story of Hitler's taste testers on a Friday in the New York Post, and actually invited a lady friend to go see the play on Saturday. Lady friend said, well, I have a date with another man friend. And she's like, let me see if I can cancel. And then God bless her, she forgot to tell me she didn't cancel the other guy for me. She didn't give up the other guy for Hitler, which I think is good for the other guy. You really don't want to get ditched for Hitler. But anyway, moral of the story is I went on my own, and man, it was art. It was art. And the first thing I do when I experience art is you go to Instagram, you start following everybody. And I was lucky enough to get Michelle Kholos Brooks, a woman who I don't know much about except from this one darn amazing off-Broadway play. Is that fair? And I don't even know if it's really that far off Broadway. It's on 42nd Street, people. And it's open until when?
It's open till May 21st.
May 21st. And since we were just sort of talking about this in the pre-interview, about how if my career got thrown upside down because of COVID, what happened to your play?
Well, my play has had a few incarnations, but in March 2020, the entire cast and crew came out from New York to open Hitler's Tasters. And we opened on a Saturday and closed on a Sunday, which was
I joked that I got laid off. I guess that Tuesday. So I've joked that I am the least essential, non-essential worker in New York City. But you know, we could talk about how COVID ruined our lives, or we could focus on the amazing creativity in Hitler's Tasters. When the name is weird, and when I've told everybody I'm going to see a play about Hitler's taste testers, people make faces at me, except for this one girl. Everybody else has made a face at me. This isn't a play about how awesome Hitler was or the great dinners he had, right?
Right. I mean, some people get really turned off because Hitler is in the title, and I always have to say, like, it's not. The title's not "I Love Hitler." Like, the title is Hitler's Tasters. You know, he used young German women to taste his food for poison. Like, who doesn't want to know about that?
Yeah, well, and that's what it was. So first of all, the story was, and tell me if I'm wrong, what, he had 15 women who would go to, or I guess it's a rotation of 15 women he had who would eat his food before he ate it?
Yeah. So according, there's this woman named Margot Volk who in like 2013 told this story at like 95 years old of having been one of Hitler's food tasters. She had never told this story before. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of information about it in general, but according to her, there were about 15 young German women that he chose to test his food. And yes, I think he had them in some kind of rotation, and then they would eat, their 3 meals a day. And after every meal, they'd wait to see if they're going to die.
And that sentence, it's funny, you're talking about it one-on-one in conversation. You don't feel that sentence until you see 3 women performing that sentence. That first hour of them waiting to see if they're going to die. And then what do you do for an hour when you're sitting around wondering if you're going to die, and the effect that must have on someone's psyche? I want to get a couple of things out of the way. One, you're so not pro-Hitler that you actually blur out the word Hitler, or you blur out the I on Hitler's tasters. One.
Yeah. We put in an asterisk for the I. It was for a series of reasons, not the least of which was for algorithms for social media.
Yeah,
because we've been kicked off Facebook, personally and also professionally kicked off Facebook for hate speech. And I mean, when you think, it's crazy when you think of like what's actually out there. And so we had to try to get around that because we're an off-Broadway show. We don't have a huge Broadway budget, so we have to promote any way that we can. But also we really ended up loving the asterisks because I feel like it opens up a really interesting conversation about what you can and can't say anymore, right? Like some people do not want to hear the word Hitler. Some people don't want to hear, I don't know, there's a lot of conversation now.
No, and I explore my own family. God, there's so many things I want to say. First of all, I find the play incredibly relevant, especially with the war in Eastern Europe suddenly popping up. Yeah. You suddenly say, and your play makes certain allegories for Trump and maybe modern popularism, right? And again, I'm just a comedian. I may be screwing up some of the big words here. But when you talk about how people could worship a big politician and how a dictator can come in and you sort of your family has to worship whoever's in power. I found that very relevant. And why do you think it's relevant, especially now as you're coming to a close in your run? Is it more relevant now than ever?
Well, the spooky thing about this play, Thomas, is since I wrote it, I wrote it initially, I heard the story and I was going to write a story about these girls in history, right?
Right.
And then I started writing it around the 2016 election. And I was hearing a lot of rhetoric out in the world that was word for word matching the research that I was doing.
Really?
And that was chilling for me.
Like what kind of words? And going this way, I understand. I don't want to say I identify with the Nazis. That is such an awful thing to say. But listen, if you're not educated, if you don't grow, it's very easy to fall into a trap. I've said this out loud before on the podcast. My grandfather fought for Mussolini in World War II. Loved Mussolini, pretty much. I think he met Mussolini once and thought, while he may have thought war was horrible, this was horrible, that was horrible. It was just one of those things where Mussolini gave the poor people an education in Italy. With Mussolini, the proverbial trains ran on time. And the way you portrayed these women, I almost saw, I don't want to say a little bit of myself in it, but that's what I'm saying. All 4 characters were not loathsome. They were victims, I think, of being women in that age. Like my Italian grandmother had a story of when the Americans invaded, wanting to hide because they weren't sure if the Americans were going to rape the women. Like when you talk about that age, that decade, being a woman, these 4 women portrayed in the play, they're like the mayor just pulled their names out of a hat almost, or picked the 4 hot women from town. One girl had her father volunteer her.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. I think that these women were chosen for the job, but the thing that's so crazy, and I think your grandmother's, feeling is feeling that women continue to have over generations, right? So,
Mhm.
so these women were all chosen for this honor, like to serve the Fuhrer. But the crazy thing is, they were the future of the Reich. Like they were supposed to have German sons and they were supposed to be perfect Aryans. And yet he specifically chose young German women to taste his food for poison.
See, I
Right?
don't know why it's women, but I could get and again, when you get into his twisted thoughts on genetics, maybe it's someone who like their genes match mine, but then why women?
Well, my guess is, and I don't know, but my guess is most of the men were probably all fighting, right? Like, I mean, let's face it, probably any man that was available, whether they were 8 years old or 68 years old, they were probably fighting, especially toward the end of the war.
Yeah.
So that's my guess. But other than just being, absolutely crazy, I don't know. I mean, part of the play is trying to figure that out, where they're saying, why us?
What's your religion? Are you Jewish?
Yes.
For all the poop Hitler's tasters gets, or the eye rolls, or the second looks, you're of Jewish descent. This had to be even weirder to write about the four oppressors, for lack of a better word. Even though these women weren't, or four women who were Christian, and the Aryans, the perfect women. That had to be hard for you.
Yeah, well, the truth is I was a young woman once. Like
Yeah.
I came to this story through the story of the women, right?
Okay.
And then there are so many other layers on top of it. But I have a lot of concerns about young women and how they're treated and how they're worshipped and then tossed away, and how women are always used as shields of war, and they're always abused and used and raped and treated horribly. I mean, we are seeing what's happening in Ukraine. It's the same story again and again and again. So I came through the lens of young women, and then other things went from there. But I don't, I'm not, some people get so upset about it. I'm not excusing anybody. I'm exploring what it's like to be taken as a young person, indoctrinated, and then being told that you're doing something because it's an honor and because you're special, but really they're being abused and they could die, right? Like that's the complexity of it. I'm not trying to, and when I say I have compassion for the characters, some people get super upset about that. But when I say compassion, I don't mean that I'm forgiving anybody. I'm saying to understand people, you have to have you have to be able to understand people, to understand how they operate. And then you can understand evil if you're understanding an operating system, I think, a little better.
Well, it's funny. Obama got in trouble once for saying about terrorists, we need to understand why they hate us. And I hated that he got destroyed for that, because if you don't look at how people get to the bad spot where bad things start happening, you can't prevent that cycle from happening again.
Right. But I don't believe that any of us is perfect. I don't believe that any of us, let's take the situation of Hitler's tasters. It's toward the end of the war. You're probably starving. You've been raised as Hitler, with Hitler as your paternalistic figure, as the person who's going to save your family and your country, right? And then you're told you have to come do this job. Like, and people say to me, well, what if they just refuse? I don't know. I feel like if Hitler tells you to eat your peas, you eat your peas. Like, I'm not sure that you have a choice in that matter. And I think all of us need to ask ourselves in a lot of these situations, like it's easy to say, oh, I wouldn't do this or I wouldn't do that, but you don't know until you're in a situation. And so to understand the mechanism of it, I think is really important, frankly, for preventing this stuff in the future. And and not saying Hitler's name doesn't mean he didn't exist.
And I love the people who say, why didn't you just refuse? It's very easy to say that now, looking back. We're also in a modern society where people can't even say, oh, the boss at work is being mean to the other coworker, and all that's on the line there is a damn paycheck. The problem is nobody remembers the little people who get shot for remembering things. Nobody, and even with protesters, how many protesters have died for our freedom of speech or been punished for expressing theirs that we don't remember their names?
I agree. I agree. I mean, the history is littered with people that we don't know their names, that have sacrificed all kinds of things. And survival is no joke. You know, survival is no joke. And so we have to look at, you know, I don't want to get off on a thing here, but like a project that I did, another play that I did is this military project. I went out and interviewed all these people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan because I didn't know anyone in the military. And one thing that became really interesting for me is, like you were saying, what Obama said, you know, like people that join the Taliban oftentimes are people who need to get their pomegranates to market to feed their families, right? So if the Taliban is letting them through the checkpoint, but the other guys aren't, so they can't feed their family if they go with these guys, but the Taliban is or paying them to join them and they're just starving, people will go with what they need to do to survive. And I think that we need to understand the truth of that.
Yeah, when you're hungry, your brain can go to scary places. And if you can fix things like that, if you can fix poverty and hunger and inequity in a way that builds people up, you'll have, I don't know, people don't go down that march. But you're right. I'm now going down a road I'm not qualified to talk on. I think the play is fantastic. We only have a couple of minutes left. One unique creative twist I'm surprised you made, or two. In between each act, there are almost, I don't want to use the word striptease, but fun, energetic dancing scenes of the girls changing costumes. And then I was also surprised that you included cell phones and selfies to make it modern. Why did you make both of those decisions?
Well, in terms of the cell phones, it was important to me as I was kind of thinking about this play and walking around the world that I did not want these girls to feel like sepia-toned people in history. You know, I wanted them to feel very, very present. Because for young people now, World War II is way in the rear view. There's an enormous level of Holocaust denial right now, right? So I wanted these girls to be very relatable, and for young people today to be able to say, oh, that could be my neighbor, that could be my niece, that could be my friend, that could be my daughter, right? I wanted it to feel very present. And then also so in between the scenes, a lot of that was created by our amazing director, Sarah Norris, and our choreographer, Ashley Wasmond. But it's really meant to show passage of time. And I don't know if you noticed, but their costumes became more and more alike as time went on, and more drab and more heavy, like they were carrying more weight.
And so they were getting drab. I did notice the drab.
Yes, they were getting more drab, but also in between, what do girls do when they're trying to kill time? You know, and especially if you're trying to forget about the fact that you could die in between every meal, right? So what do? You gossip, you talk about boys, you date, you dream, you dance. You braid each other's hair, but there's a lot of dancing with young women. And so it felt totally normal to use, in the context of that, contemporary music, and to have them dancing and dancing like their lives depended on it, because what are you going to do? Just sit there and think, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. No, you do everything you can to avoid the pain of the situation. So that's really what that's about.
Now, for the folks who can't get to New York in time to see this before this closes, and I'll have ticket links on in the show notes on the YouTube and at podcast.tomkellyshow.com. What's the takeaway? Like if we can't get there to see Hitler's Tasters in time, is there a one sentence moral that you as the playwright can give our listeners to take from this?
I would say that if I'm gonna impart some kind of a lesson, which I'm not necessarily sure that that's my job, but if I were to, I would say that I hope that the play reminds people of the dangers of complacency, because these are the girls whose family went along. These are the girls whose family didn't resist. And just because you are privileged, if you cozy up to the tyrant, that does not make you safe. Because once they're done othering everybody and dividing everybody and saying that the Jews are bad and the homosexuals are bad and the Mexicans are bad and the whatever, and once they're done getting rid of everybody else, they always turn on their own. So being privileged doesn't necessarily make you safe. So I think it's an important thing to recognize before you decide to go along to get along.
I think that's the button. There's no way I'm going to top that answer, my friend. So Hitler's Tasters, ladies and gentlemen, it is at the New Light Theater.
It's at Theater Row on 42nd Street. It's produced by the New Light Theater Project, and it's running through May 21st.
There you go, friends. So, and you know, it's funny. I am only realizing now that this is airing on May 11th. So get to New York, see it quick, people. And that's about it. We'll talk more next time on the Tom Kelly Show. Do me a favor, guys. If you enjoyed this podcast, and this is a deep one, share it with someone who will enjoy it. And I'll ramble more tomorrow. Good night, New York.